KellyAlexanderShow.com.
With so many children and adults being overweight, many people find it hard to always be eating healthy. But could some health problems be related to a lack of good fats in our diets? Rani Sheen, who is the health editor at Fashion Magazine, joins us to talk about some of the things that she's uncovered about fats in our diets. Rani, welcome to the Kelly Alexander Show.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks so much for having me.
So why do, we seem to think that all fats are bad for us?
Well, I mean, it's so all-pervasive right now that fat is something that's bad for our health. It started in the early 80s, and the low-fat movement really built to the point where now it's just, when I was thinking about writing this story, I realized that everywhere in my diet, in my own, food shopping experiences, I had that mentality when I was shopping. So every time I went to the cafe and I would order a latte, I would automatically say the word skinny before the word latte. And every time I went to buy yogurt, I would always go for the 0%. I would never choose the full fat because I felt like I was doing something bad for us. It's bad for myself. And I think that that's something, particularly women, we really feel that we're doing ourselves a disservice if we eat foods with fat in them.
That is, yeah, and it's like this pervasive attitude that's been around for a while. And I wanted to ask you as well, speaking of fats, because there are good fats, what kinds of fats should we be eating more of?
Yeah, so fat is such a complex macronutrient. It has a lot of different fatty acids within it. So we've probably heard about monounsaturated fats. Those are found in nuts. We've heard a lot about polyunsaturated fats, which include omega-3s, and those are found in cold water fatty fish. And omega-3s have a lot of benefits for our health. And then we've also heard about saturated fats. So those are found in animal products and in dairy, in coconut oil. And saturated fat is a very complex nutrient. There's a lot of different types within that. And so I think, and then, of course, trans fats we know are bad for us. Those are hydrogenated oils generally that have been heated to very high temperatures. And most people understand now that trans fats are bad for us. So the ones to really focus on, I think, are the unsaturated fats. But there are also some types of saturated fat that can have health benefits.
Can I ask you as well, just because, I know when I'm in the grocery store, I'm confused most of the time. So, so trans fats is obviously what people should be staying away from, but unsaturated fats are ones that you should be on the lookout for?
Saturated fat is still a very controversial topic. Okay. The standard wisdom is that we should be eating very low amounts of saturated fat. We should be avoiding it, and that's just the Health Canada status. That's what they recommend. Some of the newer research that I've been reading, and some of the newer literature, like books coming out on this subject, are starting to challenge that idea that some types of saturated fats can be good for us. And it's still contentious, but I thought that was a really interesting challenge to the status quo. So I can just briefly explain how saturated fat breaks down. There's short-chain saturated fat. It's all about the molecule length. So short-chain and medium-chain saturated fats, those are found in coconut oil. Butter has some short-chain saturated fats. Those ones, some of my sources are saying, are good for us in that the body doesn't necessarily store them as fat. Usually it sends them to the liver, and the body burns them for energy, whereas it behaves quite differently with other types of fats. Longer-chain saturated fats are thought not to be as healthy. That's the kind usually found in meat fat. And so you still might want to limit the amount of fat you eat that occurs in meat. But I think the overall message is that fat that occurs naturally in whole food, in real food, is generally processed well by the body, and the body can take it in moderation. It can be very beneficial for it, and the body can actually deal with the effects from it. It's when you get saturated fat in the form of oils added to processed food, and of course trans fats, that the body has a real difficulty breaking it down.
That is great. I think that's going to be very helpful for people because I know, like I said, I am confused in the store most of the time. I just sort of head to the vegetables and hope for the best.
Well, that's never a bad idea.
So I'll also ask you, though, I guess when it comes to cooking, that's been sort of, I guess, a contentious topic as well. So is it still that we should be using like olive oil to cook?
Olive oil has been shown to not react that well at high temperatures. Heating is really the issue with a lot of oils. So again, one of the registered dietitians I spoke to, she suggested using coconut oil to cook with because it can stand a bit of a higher temperature. And some of the vegetable oils, like canola and sunflower, those are quite high in omega-6 fatty acids. And omega-6 is an essential fat, which means that our body needs it because we don't make it ourselves. In our diets, we normally have very high omega-6, very low omega-3. That ratio should be smaller. So we should be eating more omega-3s, less omega-6 will generally bring us to the place where we want to be.
Gotcha. Okay, so in your kitchen, what would you be cooking with?
I'm cooking with coconut oil.
Okay, good. Perfect.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, coconut oil is huge right now. It's everywhere. Everyone's finding it. The thing to look for with that is virgin coconut oil or raw. Hydrogenated coconut oil is just as bad as any trans fat.
okay, so virgin or raw coconut oil.
Exactly.
Got it. Now, what about fat in milk? What's the difference between skim milk versus, homogenized milk?
Well, milk contains some saturated fat. It contains lots of different types of fat, but the argument now is that removing the fat from a whole product like dairy, from a whole food, a real food, is not as healthy as we've been led to think it is. And that the fat in yogurt, one of the big problems about yogurt, I think, is that when this low-fat movement really rose to prominence, and food scientists were taking the fat out of your dairy, which is what happens when you buy low-fat yogurt, they found that it was quite unappealing. It was chalky, it was tasteless, and so in many cases in these products, what has happened is that sugar has been added to make it more tasty and to make it more appealing. And the sugar in those products is actually thought now to possibly be more of a negative influx on our health, including weight gain, than the fat itself was.
Wow. So there's a lot to be learned from this.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's so confusing, but for me, what I've taken away from all the research is that when you stick with whole foods, real food, then your body knows what to do with it. And it's very difficult to overeat when you're eating those whole foods. I think that when you eat a processed food, it's a lot easier to gorge on it, whereas when you're eating full-fat yogurt, you get full pretty fast.
Right. I have a question for you about processed food. I try to stay away from it, but it doesn't always work out for me. So because my schedule is ridiculous, as is most people. So
absolutely.
What do you say to someone who maybe once a week has to sort of down a frozen lasagna?
Absolutely. I completely empathize with the time crunch. It's about doing your best. I think if you need to eat a frozen meal, have it and don't beat yourself up about it. I think it's just trying to make sure that the majority of what's in your diet is fresh food, is real food. It does take time to prepare, so it has to become a bit more of a priority. I've definitely found that I'm spending more time in the kitchen, and it's not ideal. But I think, especially for things like snacks, that can be a good place to get in some healthy, real food. For instance, things like nuts and seeds, they're great sources of healthy fat. Avocado is an amazing source of really good fat. Okay. So you can have a bit of avocado, have a couple of nuts, and that's a good snack. So I think snacking is a good way to get rid of processed food. Okay. And then if you need to have a convenience meal, you need to. You're
going to hate me for this, but I'm going to admit this. I work out quite a bit, but on Friday nights, I have to tell you, I enjoy some chips.
Yes.
I try to not eat too many of them, but I have them.
And my dirty secret is I love salt and vinegar.
Okay, very good. So what do you say to someone who likes a chip or likes a pretzel or some of those things? Is once or twice a week, if you have a little bowl of chips or something, is that okay?
I'm not advocating any kind of diet here. I actually think that when you really restrict the things you like, often you end up having more of them because you don't want food to be associated with guilt and with restriction. It's, it should be about enjoyment and about nourishing your body. So, have those chips. And, I'm certainly not saying to anybody that they should only be eating whole foods 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. I think it's more about if the ratio in your diet is mostly whole foods, I think it's a really beneficial thing for your health.
I'm really glad you said that because I think it's very important for people to realize that, you are going to have that frozen lasagna at some point. But if you're mainly trying to get in those whole foods, that you're doing yourself a favor.
Exactly, and maybe if you're having that frozen lasagna for lunch every day, that might be a habit that's worth looking into and trying to adjust.
Right, okay. You're hanging out on the Kelly Alexander Show, and joining me is Fashion Magazine's health editor, Rani Sheen. You can find her, by the way, at fashionmagazine.com and also follow them at Fashion Canada. Why do you think, we are often feeling so much guilt, when we go to grab those foods that are high in fat?
Well, I do think it's a cultural thing now. It's that movement has become so all pervasive that fat just has a negative rap. It really does. And fat is such a complicated thing that we often don't take the time to break down, to really understand the specific types of fats and how they're working in our bodies. And so I think people get confused and they just sort of revert to the basic messages that we've always heard. But I mean, some of the newer research that I was reading, it was surprising to me, but it's fascinating. It's, our cell membrane structure is built from fat. So we actually really need healthy fat in our diets. Our body needs it. And, if you don't have that, or if you only eat, say, trans fats, unhealthy fats, then long term you see that in health issues like dry skin, brittle hair and nails. There's also heart health issues are linked to it, and weight issues. So ironically, we might, we feel the guilt usually because of the weight, the weight gain. And ironically, we may be hurting ourselves, like hurting our chances of keeping to a healthy weight by not eating any fat at all.
In your research, have you found that there are specific times of the day that we should be eating fats, even if it's the good fats? I don't know if that's come into play at all in your research.
It didn't come into play actually too much in this story, but I think that's a really fascinating thing. I mean, there's definitely certain eating around exercise is whether you eat carbs before for fuel and then fat afterwards to help build the cells, help the cells repair. There's a bit of that sort of information that I've read, but I haven't actually looked into that too deeply. I think that would be fascinating.
Fantastic.
I think, and actually, sorry, the registered dietitian I spoke to, she said what she recommends is that every meal should include protein, healthy fat, and fiber. And so, by that sort of reckoning, every time you eat, really, you should be balancing those macronutrients. And so fat should be every time you eat.
Right. That's fair. Mm-hmm. And I think, we have a registered dietitian that joins us on the show. And I think one of her main messages from Kim Airy, who is our dietitian, she says, that it's important to basically live in moderation, with whatever you do.
Absolutely. Of course. And I think that is the dominating message. I think even within that, it's so hard to, you have to think about portion control, but I think that having grown up in this sort of diet mentality, there's so many fad diets, we almost study too much, exactly how much we should be eating, or the counting the calories and, I think that when you're eating the whole foods, your body kind of tells you. It's about learning to read your body signs, learning to know when you're full, when you don't really need to eat more, of whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think that if we took a page from people in the past, like our family members from generations ago, they were eating whole foods for the most part and just moving more. And I think if we sort of kept that in our thought process, our lives might be better.
Absolutely. I mean, you can, if you eat your meals and your meals include that protein, the fat, and the fiber in lots of veggies, I think that you don't need to sit there and drink, a massive soda full of high fructose corn syrup or, these unhealthy processed foods that are just so easy to keep eating and to overindulge in. I think that when you're full on a meal made of whole foods, the way that I think we think most of our grandparents did, and I think they did, food marketing is more of a recent phenomenon where processed foods are really marketed to us. And so I think that when you eat those whole foods, there isn't, there aren't that many ads for, full fat yogurt. Or for veggies, or for nuts, like those, you don't really see commercials for those. They're not really promoted in the same way. So I think that when you really sort of focus more on those foods, the way that our grandparents did, I think it's probably a healthier way to go. I feel that way now.
Now, this article that you have written is very fascinating. And where can people take a look at it?
Oh, thank you so much. So, you can find it online at fashionmagazine.com/fatchance, and it's also in the February issue of Fashion, which is on newsstands.
Fantastic. Rani, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Kelly. It was great chatting with you.
It's Rani Sheen, health editor at Fashion Magazine. Again, you can find them fashionmagazine.com as well as at Fashion Canada.